This is episode 30 of the Gauntlet podcast. My name is Jason.
My name's Rob.
My name is Paul.
My name is Dan.
Awesome. Hey, listeners, the voices you just heard, Rob and Paul, those are game designers Robert Bohl and Paul Czege. We've had Paul on the podcast before, but just as a reminder, he is the designer of games like The Clay That Woke, Bacchanal, My Life with Master, and he's also the organizer of the Threeforged RPG design contest. And Robert Bohl is probably most famous for Misspent Youth. Is that right, Rob?
Yeah, almost and famous in quotes. But
yeah. Misspent Youth is one of our favorites. It's probably like top 5 Gauntlet favorite game.
I know, that's why I listed.
I mentioned that, though, because normally for this first segment we talk about the games that we've been playing, but because we have bona fide game designers on the co-hosting today, I thought we would do games that not only we're maybe playing, but also games we might be working on. So to give listeners a little sneak peek at what you guys are up to. So why don't we get started? With that said, Rob, you're working on a game called In Production. Is it called In Production, or is it just a game in production?
Yeah, it's both.
Okay.
I think I'm going to wind up changing the name In Production, though, because there's a few too many cases, especially with this game, where you've got words like actor or character and character, or agent and agent that like overlap uncomfortably for the writing. So the title might change, but for now, yeah, it's a game about making movies. It's about the story behind the making of a movie. The player is the one that first occurs to me. I forget which 3 I like to name, but I named all 3 of them, and they were from the 90s, and my girlfriend, who's significantly younger, laughed at me a long time, and it's like, can't you think of any modern movies? And I couldn't. So that's a game I've run actually once at Sarah Williamson's New York City Freeform group, and that went pretty well. I mean, it showed some issues, but that's cool. That's fine.
Well, give us a little bit of insight into like what is the what's the gameplay like? Like, what is the game? What are the players doing in the game?
Sure. It's a game where you pick one character that you're telling the story of, like the person who's the protagonist for the overall story that you're telling. You create other characters as you start playing as they're needed, and then the other players pick up those other characters, or you can optionally at this point decide that you'll even pass the protagonist around. And then you've got a menu of scenes that you choose from that are like, okay, casting, or you're running out of time to make a shot, or, getting shit from producers or stuff like that. And those would be scene types with sort of, this has to happen in this scene. These are the characters that are most often in this scene. And then the idea is that you sort of, what characters the story's about. And you kind of, you actually at some point early on, you pick their end scene, which can change later, but it's just a point to go toward. And then you play as many scenes as you want to in between. And ideally, if it works out the way that I want it to, it'll be a game that's both LARP and tabletop with the same set of rules. And that is able to be played in like 2 hours, like we did at Freeform, or for years if you want to, by having, just going into as much detail as you possibly can with the production process. Okay,
cool. So is it fair to say that as compared to, say, like a game like Primetime Adventures, where you're all making a TV show, or the game is like constructed like a TV show, this is more about like the actual inside baseball, like behind the camera aspects of it, right?
Exactly. Yeah, you might tell the story of like an actor who's doing their first action movie, or a stunt man who, this is his last opportunity and his body's falling apart, or like somebody who's working craft services, if you want to, even. So yeah, it would be about that person's life, basically.
Okay, cool. Awesome. Dan, you got a chance to run the new hotness in story games right now, Masks. Do you want to talk about that and how that went?
Yeah, sure. So Masks is, like you said, the new hotness. I think its Kickstarter just closed at like over 100K. It is about young teenage superheroes. It's based on Apocalypse World. It feels kind of like, I think I've seen it described as a PG-13 version of Monster Hearts. And it kind of has that feel, right? Because it's about teenagers who have these powers inside of themselves and like kind of their relationships with each other. But then it's got the comic book layer on top of it. So everything's a little bit more fun and lighthearted than in, say, Monster Hearts. Yeah, we played a first session of it. We're going to play a couple more. And So far, it's working really well. Like the intro scene and everything, you kind of make your group together and you end up creating a pretty solid mythology for the city. And so we know who all of the important adult heroes are who kind of look down on us and all that. And just in general, like the intro is everyone answers questions about the first time the team came together and who they were fighting and how they fucked everything up. And then you're sort of dealing with the fallout from that initially. So yeah, it's great.
Cool. Awesome. Well, I have one quick question about that then. It seems like a lot of the new Powered by the Apocalypse games, they try to like introduce a new mechanical feature or wrinkle to the mix in order to kind of distinguish their game. What does Masks add that is like the real standout, like kind of Masks feature?
The thing in Masks is that you have your stats, but they're called labels, I think. And so they're things like dangerous or savior or freak or mundane and things like that. And it's kind of your character's perception of themselves. And so the more dangerous your character thinks they are, the more dangerous they actually are. And the more they think of themselves as a savior, the better they are at protecting people. And those things are your stats, but they're very fluid. And a lot of the moves in the game involve changing those stats. Any character who has influence over you, which sort of works like strings in Monster Hearts, but it's a lot easier to maintain influence over somebody. And by default, every adult in the world has influence over your characters because they're kids.
Nice. That's good. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's a really good
anyone
touch.
who has influence over you can come up to you and be like, man, what are you doing? You're a danger. You need to take control of yourself. And then if you don't resist their influence, then you kind of internalize that and you're like, oh, I am really dangerous. And then your danger stat goes up, right? And so that's kind of the thing, is that it's kind of looking at your character's perceptions of themselves as their powers are starting to manifest. So
cool.
That's their new little wrinkle. And I think it's a good one.
So do you care to share any of the names of your heroes in your game? Or do you remember them?
I would have to double check on some of them. They're all pretty good, but I think our big superhero, like the Superman equivalent, is called Ratman for some reason, and we've never really established why he's the most powerful superhero in the world, but he is. He has like radioactive rat powers or something, but all the other heroes are like, he's the guy. So
okay, awesome. Cool. Well, I've been playing more Monster of the Week, which we've talked about quite a bit. We're on session 4 of that series of Monster of the Week. I'm running my basically I'm running a series of Monster of the Week that I've done in the past, which is they're all based off of 1980s like action horror movie monsters. And so session 4 was inspired by the movie Phantasm, which is a blast from the past if anyone knows Phantasm. It was pretty fun. I don't have much more to say about it, except that the last 2 sessions have been pretty investigation heavy, Dan, and most of the players have enjoyed it. I think there is a way to make investigation flow really well in Monster of the Week. It's a little bit like fitting square pegs into round holes as far as that investigative mystery move goes, but I'm warming up to it.
Well, I remain unconvinced.
Fair enough. And I also played Dungeon World. I've talked about Dungeon World a bunch. We wrapped up a 3-session series that was kind of the kickoff to this new initiative I have that I'm calling Dungeon World Adventuring Company. I'm going to talk about that later in the show towards the end, so I'm not going to harp on it too much right now. But it was fun. And then I guess the one thing that I played that I'd actually want to talk about for a little bit is Soth. Sorry. Soth. Dan actually ran that game with Soth. How do you think it went? We had like a little bit of trouble in the first session as far as like how something should work, particularly like in a PvP context. How do you think it kind of came off ultimately?
I was happy with the way it turned out, but I also think that, we didn't really need to engage a lot of the mechanics in that way, because like there was never a need for me to really adjudicate what was happening when you guys were kind of going at each other, because I feel like the players we all have kind of the same sense of story. We've played together a lot, and I think we all kind of had the same feeling for where we wanted it to go. And so people let bad things happen to their characters without making a fuss about it, which is what I was worried about, because if someone's going to argue with you, you have to like really have all of your I's dotted and T's crossed, right? To be able to say, well, no, this is why this happens like this, because it's never a matter of rolling dice or anything. It's just like what you think should happen is kind of what happens. So
yeah. The author of the game, Steve Hickey, he asked how we did in the second session, and I kind of told him basically that. I said, we kind of came to a decision of like how we thought the story should proceed, and then just role played to that point.
But it all felt very natural. It didn't feel like we were avoiding using the mechanics or anything. Yeah. The story itself that was going was strong enough. Like, we all had a sense of where it should end up. So I think that's, kind of a testament to the game that we all kind of had a feeling that this is the cool place to go, and it was easy to get there.
Yeah, for sure. We didn't do much of an overview about what the game is about for this episode, but listeners, you should go back to listen to where we talk about it a little bit more on episode 29 of the Gauntlet podcast, if you want to know more about kind of what the game is actually about.
The 2-second pitch is that it's about cultists in a small town, and they're trying to summon a dark elder god because of reasons.
Right, yeah.
But they're also trying to hide the fact that they're crazy cultists trying to summon an elder god from their friends and family and loved ones. So.
Yeah, it's got a real like Coen Brothers fiasco kind of vibe to it, where it's like these people who are basically kind of losers, or they have poor impulse control, right? And that's led them to want to summon the devil. So yeah,
right,
cool. Hey, Paul, I know that you've been working on a game called, if I pronounce it wrong, tell me, Traverser, is that right?
Yeah, Traverser.
So tell us about it.
I just got done running an internal playtest of it, and right now what I'm doing is writing it up for external playtesting. It's about ex-military women with quantum reality powers in the future. There was a sort of apocalypse. The world broke itself into pieces and reassembled itself, and now it's better in some ways. There's more land, and people are making better decisions about how to live together. And the Traversers are they're the only ones who can travel across the seams in reality. They have the ability to turn invisible, and they have the ability to just get money if they need to, and get access to information and people if they need to, by virtue of having these quantum reality powers. It's inspired by a number of things. I've had the 3 little black books of Traveler since I bought them when I was a teenager. And I've always wanted to run it, and I've never managed to run it well. And then a number of years ago, my sister-in-law was dating a guy in the Army. She's in the Army as well. And we did a family vacation, and I spent some time talking to him, and he's got a certain kind of personality. He likes going off the beaten path when he travels to other countries. He's comfortable with language. He'd rather be off the beaten path puzzling out a conversation with somebody than doing tourist stuff. And we went to Cancun at the same time, and I read James Tiptree Jr.'s Tales of Quintana Roo, and she lived in the Yucatan before it was open to tourism, because you could do that if you owned property. So like wealthy Americans would have property in the Yucatan that they would as vacation homes. And she was, she wrote stories inspired by it. And what I realized was that, there's this certain mentality of traveling and seeing the world. And I think that's embedded in Traveler. I think Mark Miller, when he designed it, he was an ex-military guy. I think he understood the psychology, and he wanted to design a game that was about seeing new world. And I think that's the game he designed. And I think he probably drifted it to this sort of tramp merchant, where you've got a spaceship and you're going from planet to planet and you're making money transporting people and bringing people from planet to planet. I think if you look at Traveler, you can see betrayed in it things like the Traveler's Aid Society, which nobody ever does anything with, and the ability to get a low passage or a free passage somewhere. That the original inspiration for the game was, these are people who are planet side. So all that stuff sort of came together in my head, and it became Traverser.
What's like the central sort of mechanical thing going on in Traverser?
Yeah, so this is interesting too. It's the first game that I have ever designed that I think is hackable in the same way that Fate is hackable and Apocalypse World is hackable. The core of it is diceless, and it involves having limited options to choose from and seeing as a player whether you're on the same page with the game master or not. You're sort of comparing your sense of where the story is headed. It has kind of a traditional skill list, because I wanted it to be like Traveler and that it would have a skill list in the middle of it.
Aren't you excited, Dan? Does that sound amazing?
I am, yeah. I love lists of skills.
Except they're my kind of skills. I think if you go back to traditional role-playing games and you look at the skill list, it's everything that the person designing it thought was hard. It's, hard to interrogate somebody, or it's hard to, find a secret door, or it's hard to use a heavy weapon, or pilot a spacecraft. Traveler has a whole list of skills that Mark Miller thought were hard. This is my list of skills, things that I think are hard. So it's things like confide in someone, or also fight a gun battle is, makes the list, but it's also things like direct somebody to take an urgent action, or get access to information, get access to money. There's over 20 of them, and they're all the things that I think are hard. Change what you believe. Change one of your beliefs.
That's a good one. Yeah. That sounds familiar, right, Rob?
Yeah.
Cool. Well, how's it going so far? I mean, like you said, you've done some playtesting internally. Like, are you feeling pretty good about it, or?
I feel great about it. I think, in some ways it has some thematic similarities to The Clay That Woke. If The Clay That Woke has a sort of Southeast Asian monsoon jungle vibe to it, this has a more Central American, South American rainforest vibe to it, but you can see the similarity there.
Yeah. Yeah.
Is everyone playing these women, the characters that can cross the borders, or is it a troop game type thing, or?
No, it's game mastered just like The Clay That Woke, and the player characters are all ex-military women who've they've been mustered out of the military. It was a corporate war, but there's no rationale for it in the new reality, and so all the quantum tech has been unwound from them, and yet they still have some of these abilities, but their abilities have some consequences too. So it's a little different. It's like the tech mitigated the consequences when they were in the military, but now as individuals they have to deal with the consequences of using their quantum powers.
It seems to me that The Clay That Woke and now this game, they both seem to me like you looking kind of backwards in terms of like where the hobby came from, and taking like what you thought were the most important things about, say, old fantasy gaming, or in this case Traveler, and kind of repurposing it for like a more modern player. Is that kind of a fair assessment of your kind of like your design kind of phase you're in right now?
I think that's fair. There's a simple reason for that, and that's because these were influences on me. These were games that I had in my collection when I was, back in high school and wanted to do something with. I connected with them emotionally, and yet, for some reason, I couldn't get the local group to click with it. I tried to run Traveler, and just thematically, it just didn't hang together. And I think, this is the result of me thinking about Traveler for 30 years and eventually figuring out what it means to me.
Cool. Well, so I have one more question about this. In your game, in Traverser, can you die during character creation?
The answer is no.
I'm not buying it. You're dropping the best part about Traveler.
I think Mongoose dropped that same bit from Traveler when they...
Yeah, they did. It was only the first edition of it that had that, yeah.
I will tell you this, you have no character stats. So I dropped character stats as well.
So let me ask a mechanical question. In your diceless game, do you have to roll dice? Because that's something I learned from Soth, is that you can market a game as diceless, but then still require dice later on.
Wow, calling Steve Hickey out on the cast. Ouch.
That's my one bone to pick about Soth.
Well, I'll tell you, it's totally diceless.
All right.
People talk about The Clay That Woke as being diceless, but it still has a chance-based resolution system that involves manipulating, bits, right? I mean, it's got an oracle system. This has less than that. It is, you could play this with scraps of paper if you wanted to.
All right, well, I'm throwing away all my dice as soon as I get this game, and I'm going to be very upset when you call for dice later on in the rules.
That's inadvisable.
Dan's a very extreme person. You should ask him about his exploration of sensory deprivation chambers later on. He has very intriguing views.
I'm into that. Ever since I saw Altered States, I wanted to do it. So yeah, during Giving Me Life, Dan's got to talk about his experience.
All right, deal.
Hey, so Rob, I gather you are refining a couple of your Threeforged games. One of them we talked about, The Clinic. Do you want to talk about those and kind of where they're at and how they're going?
Do you want to just yell at us for what we said about The Clinic?
Oh, no, it's fine. There's no need to apologize. Like, you played it and you had a hard time with it. And also, it had changes that I hadn't made, so I can just assume that any problem you had wasn't my fault, and I'm fine.
So I've seen your stage, the draft that you did for it, and it was quite different actually from the final product. So, but yeah, that was definitely the hardest game we attempted to play during our playtests.
So it's a game about people who wake up in a medical-like clinic with their memories fucked with, and it's about trying to figure out what's going on and getting out. And Nick added a bunch of cool stuff, a lot of stuff that you guys liked, like the passing of the stuff to create the characters and stuff like that. And I've stolen some of that because he's been nice enough to give me permission to do that. But yeah, I think that he wound up with a very ambitious scene mechanic that has, like, I don't know, you guys counted, it's some large number of scenes.
There are like 53 possible scene types, yeah.
Yeah, my version I think has 4. that progress it, and one of them progresses it, 2 of them progress in intensity, but they're basically the same kind of scene type. It's much more minimalist, and I didn't want to tip hand that it was Alien necessarily. I wanted to, which the later version of the game did. I wanted to make it more like a thing where the group would figure it out, or the staff would decide, and then sort of impose that down. So anyway, what I did was I went back to my second round draft and I looked at Nick's work side by side, and because as I said, he was nice enough to allow me to do this. I picked the stuff that I thought was great. That's in a pretty good state. I'm preparing it for Metatopia, like the game I mentioned before, and the next game I'm about to mention. Prepared it for Metatopia a little bit. I need to do a little bit more of that, and I need to make like sheets and stuff. Could flop. But I feel pretty good about that game. I think it'll work out fine. There's a system that I don't know if the math works. I kind of feel like it does. It's sort of instinctual rather than thought out. But what were you going to ask?
Oh, I was actually going to ask Paul, the way that Rob and his collaborator Nick are working on the clinic now, is that kind of what you had in mind for the contest as far as like the overall goals?
Oh, yeah, definitely. I mean, you wanted to talk about the contest coming up, and I can definitely talk about this aspect of it when we get to that point.
Yeah, good idea. Yeah, I'm jumping the gun. You're right. I got tons of questions I want to ask. So, all right, cool, awesome. Well, Rob, is there anything else you wanted to say about the clinic?
No, I'm glad you guys liked it, and I think that the version that I have preserves the things that you liked about it, and makes some changes that you would appreciate. And if you get the chance to give it a try, I'd like to know what you think.
Yeah, for sure. One thing that I think your co-collaborator, Nick, did on the game that I thought was really good was he really made it like it had this really, really strong Twilight Zone feel to it, like it just felt like the Twilight Zone as you were kind of reading the text. And I think that's what kind of drew us to the game originally. So, I think to the extent you can preserve that vibe, I would love that personally.
Yeah, well, and that's a good segue to the next game, The Perfected City, which has a real voice to it, which, my first game, Misspent Youth, did certainly. That just was my voice. All that cursing is pretty much how I talk. But with The Perfected City, so that's a game about noble houses in this world that's like ours but not ours, and it's a fantasy game, but it's not like the standard D&D fantasy. It's sort of a more Greek and Roman inspired. But anyway, the idea is that it's a game about these noble families and the problems they have with each other and the duels that they have, either of debate or of violence, to resolve those problems. And in that game, actually, the word count restriction on the Threeforged contest wound up producing the voice there. I needed to cut words, but I didn't want to cut system or explanation or theme, all that stuff. Like, I had all these little asides about the world that I didn't want to lose. So what I did was, inspired by the Starz show Spartacus, I started pulling out as many words as I could from sentences. So, like, there are no articles, there's no A, there's no D in that text, unless it would sound really, really dumb. And even a few places where it sounds a little bit dumb. And I'm really excited about that.
Cool, yeah, that's awesome. Yeah. One thing, a little observation I had, kind of piggybacking on what you just said, which is when I was, because of, when I was writing the games, my contributions to the contest, because of the word limit restriction, I found that my legal training was super helpful because in the law, you are, despite what people think about lawyers, in fact, your writing is supposed to like have the goal of expressing as much information as possible in as precise a way as possible, but in as brief a way as possible, right? And so I found that it was very helpful to kind of express the ideas of my games, while sticking to the word limit. But yeah.
It's really you have almost no constraints with that contest. So, and I'm very compelled by constraints, and so it was really nice to get some creativity out of that one constraint. And so, like, what I'm going for with this game also I'm kind of excited about is that I want to, first of all, a whole new thing for me is that I wrote a setting, which I always kind of never thought I would ever do. And this setting's really intense, and I've got a lot more thought about it, and I really want to write about it. But it's a very strange feeling for me because it's like sleeping with the enemy, in a way. But anyway, the other thing that I'm excited about with it is that I got this idea that Vincent Baker already did, but I didn't know that, which was to different games and different kinds of games that are small, that are all telling different parts of this world. So the part that I put into the contest and the part that I'm going to play test at Metatopia is about these vendettas and these duels. But I envision a story about people who are the alchemists, people who have been modified by the alchemists to serve the families, the slaves, hunting for monsters between the cities that goes on, and all sorts of other stuff. And really, if I can, try and really create some very different kinds of games in there. Maybe even flirt with like an OSR sort of thing.
Oh, cool. Yeah, that's cool. The Vincent game you're talking about, was that Sundered Land?
Yeah. Mm-hmm,
yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. I don't know. Apparently, he didn't publish it as a book. Did he? I don't know.
No,
an actual bound?
I bought a PDF of it. But I don't think it was. There was not an actual.
He didn't do a book. It's like a 5-page PDF or something like that. 8-page maybe.
Right. Yeah. So I feel like in that way it will be. It's sort of like taking. Even though I feel okay about it because, first of all, I don't think innovation matters. It's dumb. I think execution matters, but I still, was raised with the biases I was raised with. So I can pat myself on the back and think of it like, well, I didn't know that Vincent came up with that, so I did. And also, I'm taking this thing that he did in a small way, and I'm really going to try and give it a big push.
That sounds really exciting. Yeah, that sounds really cool. I looked at the Perfected City at your urging, actually, as I recall, when the contest was over, because there's so many games, you can't read them all, right? At least I couldn't. Right. And I didn't have any time to to really like go deep dive on it. But the one thing that shines through really clearly when you are just kind of skimming through it is the setting is very strong on that one. And it's also one of the prettier of the game submissions, I think. Was that your stage 3, Rob?
That was my stage 3.
Okay, yeah, it looks good.
I put it in InDesign. I learned InDesign to do the first Ashcan version of Misspent Youth. And a lot of people complained about it. They thought that it was a PowerPoint because I had bullets and it was landscape. So I triggered a lot of people on their PowerPoint hate, unfortunately. But thank you.
I thought it looked pretty good. It was, it was better than just like reading just a block of text. So, but of course that's a pretty low hurdle.
I should just take a compliment.
Cool. Yeah, we'll look forward to that one. I think that was one of the games that I remember there was a lot of chatter about. People were very interested in that one, so I'd be curious to see what you end up doing with it. The Perfected City. Hey, Dan, you played Lacuna. You guys wrapped up your Lacuna thing. Is there anything you want to say about that?
Not really. It's still good.
Awesome. Cool. Does it continues to deliver after 3 sessions?
Yeah, it does. I was kind of getting bored with the standard sort of mission structure, and I think if we had a few more sessions, we would have gotten into a lot more of the weirdness, but then again, there's not much support for that in the rules, so then it's basically just the GM making up setting as he goes along. So it's cool. It supports that, I think, in a way. It leads you into that, but then it just you're completely on your own as the GM, so we didn't go there. But it was fun.
Cool, good. I got to play Lamentations of the Flame Princess, speaking of OSR things. That is James Raji's, I guess it's kind of a retro clone, or it's basically kind of like it's very clearly inspired by early editions of Dungeons and Dragons. Kind of a controversial game, if I'm being honest. A lot of people take a lot of issue with some of the content in there because it's very, very mature. But we have this new thing on Hangouts called OSR Tuesday that our friend Doyle is running, and so I got to play Lamentations for the first time. It's kind of neat. Something I didn't know about it until we started was, or I didn't really sink into me anyway, I should say, until we did this session, was it actually takes place in the real world. Like historically, it takes place in 16th century Europe, I believe. And so that was kind of an interesting thing to have like wizards and thieves and stuff, like or like kind of D&D type characters in that setting. But you don't like explicitly refer to your characters as the D&D classes. You refer to them like as something more like era appropriate, I guess. But we didn't really get to do much. We made characters, and then we kind of started the first dungeon. So I don't have a whole lot to say about it yet. But
can I ask you about character creation in that game?
Absolutely.
I created characters for that game too, and I found it a little bit frustrating, and I got yelled at on the internet when I said that, because you get these 6 stats, and unless you use your D&D knowledge, you don't know what to do.
That's true, yeah.
Largely so you wind up with this character who's probably average, because that's how the math works. I had a slightly okay dex and a really bad con, and I eventually gave up and decided to play a thief, or no, maybe a high wisdom. Whatever it was, I took the D&D standard, but I was like, it didn't tell me what to do. What did you feel? I feel like character creation is so easy, and it's so strange that wasn't stronger.
It didn't occur to me, and I think it's because I expected the full, like, just D&D experience out of this game, and me and Dungeons & Dragons go way, way back. And so to me, like, I didn't personally have this issue just because all of my stats were more or less the same. They all, like, kind of rolled to the mean or whatever, like they were like all 11 or 12, essentially. And so there wasn't, like, a lot of decision making on my part. So I didn't personally run into that. But I guess, like, to my mind, I'm expecting a very, very traditional Dungeons and Dragons kind of experience. And so I know what you do with intelligence. I know what you do with strength. It wasn't something that really kind of I thought about much, I guess. Another thing worth pointing out, the game has a ton of players. There's so many people in this group, which is awesome. I'm glad people are excited about it. But it kind of necessitated that we kind of get through everything very quickly, and just because there was so much for Doyle to manage. I don't know if that answers your question or not, but I guess it didn't really quite occur to me, I guess. But there may be things I'm not aware of as far as Lamentations goes, where the stats.
Quick, if they were all 11s or 12s, if they were all 11s or 12s, what did you make it? How did you make a decision on what kind of character to make, even with your D&D knowledge?
Well, so I'm not inclined to, I guess my story gamer in me is not inclined to like power game. And so I just made the character I wanted to make, which was I wanted to make a grim sellsword from the north, because I wanted to speak with a northern accent, right? Like, so that was kind of, that was my only thought process, Rob, on that.
I don't mean to crap on the game. Like, it's really, like, it looks really beautiful, and there's a lot of really cool things about it, and I hear the monster creation system's really cool. But I just, that part confused me. So anyway, sorry.
No worries. No, I mean, my interest in the OSR is almost expressly aesthetic. I mean, I'm very intrigued by, I love some of these settings. I love the art. It has like a sort of, it has a nostalgia for me, but it's almost like a nostalgia that never was. It's like nostalgia for an era that didn't actually really exist. It's kind of like our fantasy version of what D&D was like, back in the 80s and 90s. And so I kind of,
that's how
Yeah, that's kind of my feeling on it. And so, but I wanted to, instead of just being like OSR, curious, I wanted to actually, play something in the OSR. So Doyle, who's a very good GM, was kind enough to kind of run it for us. So.
Character creation as a game design topic is really kind of interesting. The countless number of games that I've played where the designer really got character creation right, and everything else is wrong. The number of times, you're playtesting somebody's game, and, it's about cyborgs, and you get to go through list after list and pick the bits and pieces, and you come out with this character that you're super excited to play. And then you get to the actual game, and, you don't know what to do. On the other hand, you get to play that woke where you don't really have any idea of what your character's like until you actually start playing.
Yeah.
But yeah, in a largely traditional game like Lamentations of the Flame Princess, I would expect it to sort of skew to that. Hey, when you come out of character creation, that is the point at which you are most excited about your character, because
right.
I don't want to go that far just because Doyle, our GM, he's been kind of really emphasizing to us like this idea of the story, and our characters are kind of like what we make of them. It's almost like a very, it almost has like echoes of like how, like kind of story now, right? Or whatever, right? Or play to find out what happens. It has echoes. The way he's kind of running it has echoes of that.
You managed to make a character that you're excited about. So.
Oh yeah, I knew straight away what I wanted to do. I didn't care if my strength was low. Like I wanted to play a Ned Stark-esque or I should say Sean Bean-esque, like sellsword guy. That's what I wanted to do. So
keep in mind, people crawled up my ass about this when I talked about it online, which means that most people didn't have a problem with it, and clearly it's me. And I was just
I think what it is, Rob, is that, like, for my personal experience in this OSR Tuesday thing, the group is really big, and I get to play lots of games already, especially games that maybe I'm a little bit more into. And so I'm kind of enjoying just going with a real simple character archetype. It doesn't require too much RP, and I can kind of hang back and kind of watch Doyle do his magic, And so that's kind of where I'm at with it personally. So I don't know if, I can see, like, I kind of take your guys' point, especially, and particularly Paul's point about this character is as interesting as it's ever going to be right now, except I think that's more of like a Pathfinder thing, because those characters they have so many, like, talents and powers and stuff, and, like, that's always kind of been my feeling about those characters, like we've talked about this before, Dan, like this idea of
right. It's about front loading all of the interesting stuff during character creation. And then when it comes down to it, you're just a dude who maybe has a +3 instead of a +4 when you swing your sword. So,
right. Yeah. Exactly. Yeah. I'm thinking, though, I get the impression that Doyle's going to run it a lot more like play to find out what happens, kind of a style of play. So we'll see how it goes. I will have a report for you guys next time for how it proceeds. So
cool. Excited to hear it.
Yeah, so that just leaves on the list A Taste for Murder. Have we ever talked about A Taste for Murder, Dan? I can't remember.
I can't remember either. Well,
A Taste for Murder is by Graham Walmsley. It is a game that is essentially Downton Abbey, or it's kind of like it takes place in a 1930s English country manor, and the players play members of this, like, aristocratic family or their servants. You have your own little, like, sort of family politics that you're dealing with. Eventually someone gets murdered, and then an investigator shows up and investigates the family to try to, like, find out who did it. And the cool thing about the game is the game assumes that everyone had the opportunity and the means to commit the murder, and so the game focuses exclusively on motive. And so all of your RP is focused on, like, drawing out motive from the other players, like why, like what, did you have a reason to do it, that kind of thing. It's a really, really fun, like, RP thing. Like, there's a lot of space for, like, really fun role playing, and I thought it was pretty good. I think we have talked about it before. I'm kind of reminding myself as I say this. It's a solid game. I really enjoyed it. What'd you think, Dan?
Oh yeah, I like it. This is the first time I ever got to be the investigator. So whoever is playing the character, there's a vote halfway through to see who dies, and then the player of that character comes back as the investigator. And so that was fun. And I think every time we've played it, the temperament of the investigator has been very different. So that's been fun too. So my investigator was just a huge dick.
Yeah, your guy was. I love the way you played the investigator. You played it very. Everyone took note of it because it was really good. You played it like almost like he was kind of villainous, almost like like he had like a class warfare thing going on, where he kind of resented these rich people and their stupid lives, and like he wanted to nail them to the wall. I kind of enjoyed that. I thought it was really fun. Have you guys ever played A Taste for Murder?
I
have not played it.
It's pretty awesome. Yeah, you should give it a shot. I've played it one other time outside of the Gauntlet with, like, family members, and it goes over really well with people who are not really role players, because it kind of has a I don't know, it has a little bit of, like, I think people kind of, like, understand, like, kind of murder mystery, like, stories and how they're supposed to go. Awesome. Well, I think that's all we've got. Let's move on to the next segment. Our next segment, as always, is Giving Me Life. This is where we discuss things that are not necessarily related to role-playing games that are giving us life this week. Paul, what's giving you life?
So the company I worked for a long time decided they were going to get rid of the whole team that I was on in April, which means I've gotten to spend the summer with my son, who's 4 years old, and go to the park and go to the science center and the library, and it's awesome. I mean, to see a 4-year-old get better at everything, video games and, throwing a tennis ball around, it's giving me life. The other thing I'll say is, as the person who was running Threeforged, I needed to stay back and be objective about it. I didn't have a vote in who was going to win it. I couldn't participate as a game designer. Otherwise, I felt like it would skew it, right? But when the games were coming in, the first drafts, I was reading them as they were coming in. I read, I probably carefully read, a dozen or more of the first drafts, which were only 700 words long, and power skimmed like probably 60 of them as they were coming in. And there were times when I really wanted to be able to participate in it. And one of the games really tempted me. I mean, it's like I could insert myself in this, and I could give this one to myself, and I could work on it, and it would be fun because it was a great game, and I really, I felt like, I could do something really great with it. But I did not do that, in fact. But now that it's over, I emailed the designer and I said, I'd really like to do a fan version of this game, and would you mind? If I don't want to step on your toes, if you're working with the other designers and you want to do something with it, fine, just tell me no, But if you're not, I would really love to do a fan version of the game. And she said yes. So now I have permission to do a fan version of the one that I've been thinking about since stage one.
Do you care to share which one it is?
I'll tell you which one it is. It's the one about the living boats. It had,
yes.
Yes. I love it.
I think it became Tales on the Weird Seas or something like that. Right. But I think it had a different title at stage 2. So since I've seen all the stages, I'm a little confused about which titles were the final titles for a lot of the games.
I think that game had my favorite line. There was a line that Jason Morningstar quoted from it, which was like the first line, right? Which is like, in this game, the PCs play living boats, which is good. But then my favorite line was later on when it was like, there's very little magic in this world except for that whole boat thing, which I just thought was brilliant.
Awesome. I'm glad you said that you mentioned that spending time with your son was giving you life, Paul, because it softens the podcast quite a bit. I have been accused of being very unkind to gamers with children, so and uncaring of their personal circumstances. So thank you for humanizing us. All right. Awesome. Hey, Rob, what's giving you life?
So yeah, I put like the superhero shows at first, but I was like, that's everybody. So I decided to talk about the thing that the people seem to care about the least that I'm interested in, which is ska music.
Hey,
nice, yeah.
Rob, true or false? I heard that ska is dead.
Well, it's dead. I mean, people still make it, but it's dead.
Okay. I've been hearing that since like the 90s, I think. So I just wanted to get your read on it.
Yeah, I mean, it's not entirely true because there have been ska bands continually releasing albums, but the last time anyone outside of maybe 20 people, no, that's not true. Maybe that's like a few 100,000, maybe 1 million people cared about it was the 90s. Yeah. But I mean, I've been having a shitty period too. I also lost a job recently, and I'm pretty grimdark. It's not quite positive. I mean, even the dark stuff is like happy. There's like really awful songs. The old stuff is pretty awful about like child abuse and misogyny. And until you get through the accent and get the lyrics, you're like, yay, happy, dancing along, bopping along. But most of it is actually really, really enthusiastic and happy and also like, yeah, it just makes me happy whenever it comes up on my mix.
It's like another treasure from the mid 90s, the Macarena. That song, which is, considered to be a delightful little pop dance song, is incredibly dark. The lyrics to that song, it's like about a woman who gets murdered or something. It's really, really, yeah. But anyway, just want to throw that in there. I was thinking of the Macarena while you're talking about. The last time I listened to ska was like 1996, I think. Mighty Mighty Boss Tones and No Doubt and all that. So, but cool.
You might have just won Jeopardy for some of the listeners.
Awesome. Is there anything else you want to say about it, Rob?
So who should I listen to if I were to listen to ska now?
Well, thank you for the question, Daniel. I would say so. If you want like old school roots stuff, I would say Desmond Decker, although that is where a lot of the uglier material is in the older stuff. There's a band I love a lot called Skank and Pickle from the 90s. They had like a lesbian and a Korean man, and they would do a lot of like progressive songs that also use those stereotypes to make fun of them and stuff. Really interesting. And then Operation Ivy probably is another great option to get more rough and punk and hard-edged, or rancid even. That's sort of like if you Operation Ivy's a little bit more gentle, but if you want to go into like the hardest you can go with ska, probably I would recommend Life Won't Wait by Rancid.
All right. Well, see, here I thought you were going to come up with like modern ska bands, but these are all bands that I listened to like in the 90s and the early 2000s. So
I think ska actually is dead.
Yeah, right. See, I thought you were just being coy and that it actually wasn't dead, but it seems like that's finally come true, maybe.
Naughty Rocker. Naughty Rocker from 2011. You might be hard to find them. KNOTTYROCKER. The year might be wrong, but
Okay, great. I'll look that one up.
Awesome. I think I'll go next, Dan, because I think yours is probably better than mine. So I'll go before you.
Okay.
I don't want to follow yours. So no, mine's cool. So our friend Ray Otis, who is from Jelly Saw Games, or he is in charge of Jelly Saw Games. In addition to his role-playing game stuff, he also has this blog called Ray's Radio Revival. I think I have that right. Yes, Ray's Radio Revival. And what it is he has listened to all of these old like radio dramas, like from the 30s and 40s, and he kind of like links to them so you can go listen to them yourself. And then he also like reviews them and talks about them a little bit. And I've had a lot of fun like kind of going through it. And I've only listened to one so far. It was one called Sorry, Wrong Number, about a woman who she's waiting for the switchboard operator to connect her to someone, and she gets connected into a conversation between a pair of people who are planning a murder. And so it's kind of like this neat little suspense story that stars Agnes Moorehead, who's an actress from a long, long time ago. So I've only listened to that one, but I've had a lot of fun, like just kind of like building my list of old radio dramas that I want to listen to. There are a lot of podcasts that are like kind of replicating this like style of like old radio play right now. And it's kind of cool to kind of go through these actual like old radio plays and kind of see which ones might be worth listening to. And Ray's little blog thing is pretty awesome. Like he has like lots of interesting critiques to say about each one, but they're kind of like nice small capsule reviews of each one. So it's easy to digest. So yeah, Ray's Radio Revival.
Did you know Ray before Threeforged?
I don't remember when I met Ray. I mean, we played some of his games long before Threeforged, so I think we probably chatted at some point before that, yeah. But Threeforged definitely deepened our friendship and bond. So.
Awesome, that's what I wanted to hear.
Yeah, so that's giving me life. Ray's Radio Revival. So Dan, you're up.
The one I had written down it is called The Art and Science of Billboard Improvement, which is a document written by the Billboard Liberation Front that gives you instructions on how to deface billboards without getting caught and without killing yourself. So that was my original thing. Still very cool. The opening of it is amazing, and everybody should read it. I don't know. Maybe I'll do something with that later. What's that?
That sounds awesome.
Oh yeah, it's great. Yeah, I kind of figured you might be into that, Rob. I don't know. I've stereotyped you based on misspent youth and the punk things I see you post. So I was like, yeah, this is something. Rob's probably read this, but
I'm too much of a wimp to actually do it. But I certainly would love to read about it.
Right, exactly. Like I got the same kick out of reading this as like when I was a kid and I would read the Anarchist Cookbook or something, right? Where it's like, oh, this is some great stuff I'm never going to do. But yeah, so that's cool. Billboard Liberation Front is a pretty rad group of dudes. But apparently I should be talking about astrally projecting myself in a sensory deprivation tank. So let's talk about that.
Absolutely.
All right, here's the deal. There is a place... I'm sure there are plenty of them, but that's one of the good things about living in a city the size of Houston is that like any weird shit you want to do, there's somebody who's making a living doing it. So this place that I went to is in a strip mall. It's between like some sort of dive bar and like a Jimmy John's or something, right? So you go in there and you talk to this guy, and he's like an interesting dude because anyone you meet in this sort of like in any of these weird sort of things you go do, anyone you meet who's devoted their life to this, who's like, this is what I'm going to do for a living is I'm going to buy these giant pods and fill them with water and charge people to float in them. And that's my life now. So anyone who's like into it enough to actually do that is going to be an interesting dude. But so he comes in and he talks to you and he's like, well, they kind of set the bar real low because if you've ever watched, anything, any TV or movies that have any sort of sensory deprivation thing, it's like you get in, they close the lid, and you're like just tripping balls immediately. And so they set the bar really low, and he's like, well, there's about a 3% chance that you'll actually have visual hallucinations. But, of course, you will get better at it as time goes by. So are you interested in a 3-pack of float sessions? So it's good. It's a good business model.
Did you buy the 3-pack?
I did not, actually. I might later. I don't know. But go into this weird place in the strip mall, and then they're like, all right, now take all your clothes off and go take a shower in this room. That's like, these are like converted office buildings too. So it's a real weird scene. And so you go take a shower, and then you get in this thing and they close the lid, and it's dark, very salty water. And then you kind of float around in the dark for, I think we did an hour and a half. Yeah, at the end of it, I did not astrally project, unfortunately. It was a lot like I was just laying in the dark for an hour and a half. Like,
That's what I was afraid of. I would just be bored.
Yeah, your mind kind of wanders, and it's sort of an interesting experience, and you feel really weird after, but I think a lot of that, you could probably feel just as weird if in the middle of the day you just laid down in the dark for an hour and a half and then just got up and went about your day. Also, if you strip naked and take a shower in a strange business, that also adds to the weirdness. So, yeah, I don't know. It's an interesting thing.
There are several places you can do it in Michigan. The closest one to me is about an hour and a half drive away. I wanted to do it, and I've read up on it. None of the ones that are near me were in a creepy strip mall. One looked like it was like an outbuilding that a woman had at her house. Like she had a back rental building or something like that. And she had some stuff on her webpage where she said, I'll be there to talk with you afterwards, to talk about the experience, because it takes a little while to come down from it. I mean, she had a very sort of earth lore, vibe to her website. I totally want to do it. And even though you didn't have the best experience, I think you haven't turned me off to the idea.
Well, aren't you going back, Dan? I mean...
Oh, I don't know. I would. I might wait, though, because apparently he's going to get a cryotherapy thing, too, which is one of the like little cubes that is frozen to like minus 176 or something, and you strip naked and you get in there for like 2 minutes, and it's supposed to be a full body ice bath thing, and I don't know, it probably cleanses toxins or some bullshit. So
hey, so the thing is you have I think probably fully 1/3 of your Give Me Lives has been about virtual reality, if I'm not mistaken. A lot of them, anyway.
Probably, yeah.
And you talk about it a lot, at any rate. VR, sensory deprivation chambers. I feel like you're trying to get away from the real world. Have I pegged you right here?
Well, yeah, maybe, but just for like 2 hours at a time, and then I'm good to come back. So it's just a little vacation.
Nice. Okay. All right.
Yeah, I kind of want to give it a try myself. I don't know if there's any places to do that around me, but I know there are places where you can like get naked in a stranger's home and take a shower. I just don't know if there's any sensory deprivation there.
Yeah, actually, Paul, it's funny you should mention the thing about the person having it in their house, because for the longest time that was the only way to do it in Houston until this place in the strip mall opened up, and I was always a little bit hesitant to do it because I don't know, it just like it takes a real special sort of person to actually dedicate a room in their house to this sort of operation. And I felt like I would have brought in like bug scanning equipment, like I was on an episode of The Americans or something, to look for like the hidden cameras that were going to take pictures of me naked.
Have you seen Altered States?
I have not now.
Oh, you should see it. I wonder if it holds up to the test of time. But I saw it when I was a kid. It made a huge impression on me. William Hurt goes through the sensory deprivation experience and manages to sort of regress himself to an increasingly primal state. And there are times when he spends way too much time in the tank, and it has some pretty dramatic results. Which, if you've seen the Aha video for Take On Me, you've seen the famous scene reimagined as a cartoon sequence where he's trying to keep himself from becoming a cartoon.
Right.
Or he's trying to turn himself from a cartoon into a human being. And
right.
In Altered States, he has that. That's where it came from anyway. In the hallway of his house, he's having some repercussions from his sensory deprivation experiences.
Gotcha. Well, I can report that at no time did I turn into a cartoon.
Yeah. Or a primate, right?
Or a
he
primate,
turns into
yeah.
a primate in the movie.
Awesome. Let's go to the next segment. So our main topic for this week is, if you hadn't already guessed, is the Threeforged RPG Design Challenge. We've talked about Threeforged a fair amount. A few episodes back, we did our playtest recap of all the games that we playtested. Of course, we had Paul on a few months ago to talk about the contest before it started. But now I thought it'd be interesting to do just kind of like almost like just a bit of reflection on the contest and kind of some things that we observed. Obviously, our listeners know that we play tested a fair number of these games, like 15 or 16 of them. And so we kind of bring that to the table. Rob, heroically, I think, wrote many, many critiques of the games that he read. What was the final number, Rob? Do you have a count?
Alan DeSmet has this spreadsheet, so you could get the exact count, but I think it's like the high 30s, like 38, 39.
Okay, that's awesome. And
I at least started to read each one. I didn't finish them all.
Okay, I see. But you wrote quite a bit about each one that you read, and it kind of like makes me sad that all of these things that people were writing are just kind of like dispersed all over the internet. Like I feel like these should be like easy to find in some other way, but
well, the spreadsheet really helps with that, actually. You can look at that spreadsheet, and there's links to all of the reviews.
Oh, okay. Oh, we should link to that spreadsheet then in the show notes.
And there's also the community, which I know we're going to talk about later, but a lot of the reviews do get captured there.
Cool, awesome. And of course, so Rob's on because he read and wrote reviews of many of these games, and obviously, Paul organized the contest. So I thought it'd be fun to get us all together and just talk about it a little bit. I wanted to kick off by talking about the actual games themselves, as opposed to process stuff. So I'd like to just kind of poll the room here. Are there any design trends that you guys thought stood out in the games that you saw? Like anything that really jumped out at you as far as design trends?
I think there's more distributed authority in these games than in the games that get published, and probably more cards than in the games that get published. But I also think both of those things are subject to a cognitive. What's that thing where you notice things that are different? I use this phrase all the time. I don't remember. Anyway, you notice when things are different from what you're expecting. And so I think that's what happened. A lot of people every goddamn game has cards in it. And I think Vivian did the math on it and discovered actually there's, it's the minority of games that have cards. But those are things I know.
It did seem like a lot of the games used playing cards for their mechanics. I mean, probably at least half of the ones we played did, right, Dan?
Of the ones we played, probably, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, many of them did. I wonder why. I wonder why that was the go-to. Well, like Rob said, it was actually a minority, but I wonder why it stuck out to us, and I also wonder why so many people chose to do it.
Well, for my part, I used cards in one of my games. I like that cards are flavorful, and that you can you can get associations from them and stuff. And I think it's unfortunate that most of our design technology is around dice, which are less flavorful.
When you say flavorful, what do you mean by that?
A heart means a lot more than the number 7.
Got it. Okay. What do you think about, I was thinking that maybe the one thing that might explain why there were so many games that use playing cards is you get, there's a lot more chance for variability in play cards. Does that make sense? You can have a lot more, variable options in a deck of playing cards than you can on, some dice. Definitely.
You can look at people's hands. You can steal from their hands. You can steal looking or not looking. If you've played Magic, there's they've basically done the R&D to figure out how many different kinds of things you can do with cards. You could just steal that from them.
Paul, what do you think? Were there any design trends that stuck out as far as these games go?
I'll tell you, running the thing, by the time I got to the stage 3, I've read very few of the games. I've read the finalists, and I've read a couple more beyond
okay.
that. So you and Dan and Rob are probably more familiar with the landscape of the finished games than I am.
Dan, what do you think?
Yeah, I was going to say the cards thing, too. And I don't know if it is, I don't know if I even really would have noticed it if not for everyone else being why are there so many cards everywhere? But then when I look back on it, I was yeah, there were kind of a lot of card games. So, yeah, that's kind of the one that stood out for me, too. And, I mean, just in general.
Bias. That's what
there you go.
Confirmation bias.
Confirmation bias, yeah, there it is.
But just in general, a lot of games with very simple mechanics, which I think is probably a function of the word count.
I thought that too, yeah. Well, my own games were that. I mean, my own games, they were mostly just kind of ideas with scene framing and some very, very simple resolution stuff. I mean, and I think that's because I think that was the nature of the contest, the word count. Yeah. And also just the fact that, we're not having months and months to design these games, right? So to get something kind of done and playable, you had to go a little simpler, I think.
And I think the games that tried to get more complicated suffered for it. I think they were harder to read, and you didn't have the buy-in that you might have in a more complicated game that you purchased and were intending to play. And so even good games that were doing the right thing might have suffered from being complicated in that spectrum.
You said something earlier, Rob, about distributed authority. Is that what you said?
Yeah.
Define that for us.
Something other than GM players. Something where basically breaking that standard trope. Although given the community that it comes from, that's not that surprising either. There's a lot of comfort with breaking up those roles or destroying them or sharing them in the indie scene.
Yeah, there were like. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
I'll say this. One of the things that I was particularly happy about with the challenge is that it got reshared on Reddit and Facebook and elsewhere, and so a number of the names of the people who participated were people that I was completely unfamiliar with. So I think you did get participation from people who are beyond the Google Plus scene, beyond the core active indie tabletop RPG design scene. So if you're seeing a lot of games that break the trend of GM players, I don't know, I don't know why that is, but I think that there are definitely people from outside the core of the scene.
Maybe it's escaped into the wild, that ethic.
Yeah, Fiasco was on, Geek and Sundry, so I think people are, and it's pretty well exposed among board gamers, and The Quiet Year as well is pretty well, exposed among board gamers. So they come to a challenge like this, and maybe they see a stage 1 game, and, they know where to go with it.
That's cool.
It's got to have cards like The Quiet Year,
Or how about this? Maybe a lot of strongly opinionated story gamers got phase 1s that were more traditional games and were just like, nope, fuck that, and changed them into GM-less story games.
Are you calling people out right now, Dan?
I'm just throwing it out there as a possibility. I don't know anything about what you guys might have done.
I know Rob did because we talked about it on back channels, but I did it as well. I got a stage 1 game where I was like, nope. This is not a game I would play. And so I took Paul's advice really, really to heart of make the game you'd want to play. And so I basically rewrote it. There was nothing left of that guy's stage 1, or maybe girl. I actually didn't see whose it was. But, I think I was within the rules of the contest. Paul, were we in the rules of the contest to do that?
Yeah, I was glad I did that pep talk at stage 2. I think there would have been a lot more drop off if I hadn't. And, from my perspective, it's way better to see a game make it all the way through all 3 stages, even dramatically changed, than it is to have a bunch of people feel like, I need to be super faithful to this person, and yet I don't have the, expertise, or I don't click with it, and I can't do anything. I'm done, I think people were happier with their own participation. What was that?
I said I definitely would have dropped out if not for that video. Like, there's no way. I'm not that way. I'm bad at cooperation when it comes to design.
And I've said the secret of the iterative, the inspiration for the iterative activity of the challenge before is Game Chef reviews, which I've done in the past, and where it sure feels like, nobody cares about the reviews. You do all this work, reading and writing the mandatory reviews, and the designer only really cares if it's praise and if they're going to get voted forward in, to become a finalist. And so what I wanted to do with the challenge was make the reviewing more powerful. And so in this case, you don't have to plead with some designer to change something about their game that should be changed. You can just change it. And still you have to do it, but it's more powerful than writing a review. It's, hey, I can really just change this. You've made this, horrible expression of something that's culturally insensitive, or you've done, something mechanically that would be, unbearable, or whatever. I'm changing it. I'm making it different. I'm going to make it as good as it can possibly be.
All right. Cool. Well, so is there anything else we want to say about the actual games themselves? I had a couple questions about it, but I kind of feel pretty satisfied with that sort of bird's eye kind of talk about it. I was curious if you guys had any standout games from the contest that weren't finalists. Paul, you already talked about the boat game, but I was curious if Dan or Rob, if you guys had one you wanted to mention.
Well, I've mentioned it before, but there's a game that I think a up and coming young designer named D. Vincent Baker. It was his stage 3. And it's called Fear of the Dark. Yeah. I think he's really got a future in the hobby. It was called Fear of the Dark, and it's about little kids in a house after they've been supposed to go to bed, sneaking around and just being scared of mundane things that they imagine to be monsters. It's super cool.
Cool. Rob, did you have one?
Yeah, I'd say the Platonic Masters, which wound up at the center of a little dust-up because somewhere along the way they made the mistake of introducing systematic oppression in the society but not making the protagonists victims of that oppression. But it's a game where you play, initially in the Stage 3 version, you played old men who had Avatar powers, Avatar the Last Airbender type powers, and you had a crappy society and you're going to break it and fix it. And thankfully there was a really good talk about that Vivian Spartacus brought up, and then once the contest was over, the 3 stage designers talked about it and talked about what the solutions are, and Ashton, I don't remember the last name, but Ashton McCallan did a thread, and I recommend people look for it, because in it Vincent posted his own fix of it for those issues and a few other things, and I'm really happy with it. Basically what it is he turns the protagonists now have to be victims of oppression in some way, and you name what it is. And then the language around working on other people's oppressions is really great. It's like, this thing that angers me, and I'll be there in aid when I can. That kind of, I'm doing it badly. It's much better, but it's a really interesting, fun game. It's like I said, it's sort of like a grown-up misspent youth. I have a little bit of a desire to steal and maybe go misspent youth too. I love the way that the game sets up atrocities in the culture, and then from those atrocities builds out these institutions that then from there build out into NPCs. It's really exciting and interesting and fun.
Cool. Awesome. All right. Well, so Paul hit on it a little bit already, but why don't we talk about the social media aspect of the contest? Because this was something that I thought was very interesting. I've only really started to pay attention to role-playing game things outside of the Gauntlet, just in the last year or so. And so, it hasn't been that long. So I was very curious about the sort of social media chatter and stuff that was going on. And so why don't we talk about that for a minute? Let's talk about the hashtag. Paul, I know you were pushing the hashtag in a really big way, the hashtag Threeforged thing. And then Jason Morningstar established a community for reviews, which I gathered you, at least initially, didn't agree with. Maybe you still don't. I don't know. But I'm just kind of curious, kind of what your thoughts were about how you wanted the conversation about Threeforged to proceed in social media.
Yeah, definitely my goal for Threeforged was community building. And I think our traditional perspective on community building is some game publisher puts up a publisher-specific forum, or it looks like The Forge. But, things like publisher forums I think are problematic, and Google Plus communities have this. And I realize I'm talking to 2 people right now who run a Google Plus community.
Yes.
So,
Right.
3.
Oh, yeah, right. So, and it's not like I don't, right. I use them for playtesting as well. But the thing about publisher-specific forums is that either they go fallow and there's no activity and they sit there looking dead and they drag your brand down, or you're the only one starting conversations in there one by one, trying desperately to sort of keep the thing active. And I'm sure you've seen these littered across the internet, whether it's PHP-BB boards or whatever, or a Google Plus community. Or they don't scale, or they do scale. They scale dramatically, and they start to attract bad actors. And then you've got to do a ton of moderation. And a friend of mine was a moderator on the America's Got Talent fan forums. And you can only imagine the nightmare of constant moderation of bad behavior being attracted to the forum. So, a hashtag isn't like that. A hashtag looks like a window in time. It looks like, hey, these people did this thing, and if I want to find it, I can still find it by searching on the hashtag. I think we're in, the internet is different than it was 7-8 years ago. Before Facebook, before Google+, before Twitter, community building looked like publisher forums. And you gathered around some central personality, or you gathered around some publisher, and you had a publisher-specific forum. Now it's a social media landscape. And so it's interesting to me to see people looking at Threeforged and say, I don't think Paul's going to get the community building that he wanted as an outcome of this thing. And I think all this Threeforged stuff was spam, in my stream. I mean, you're looking at community building and not seeing community building, because community building looks different than the lens that you have, that you expect. Because community building in a social media landscape is about creating community effects. And Threeforged, I couldn't be happier with the community effects that were, an outcome of running the challenge. They're
Cool.
all over the place.
That's good to hear. Well, so let's kind of transition to some of the effects of that community. One of them being the tremendous amount of reviews that were being written by people who were reading the games, doing a service, I think, for people who needed a way to kind of parse through this large number of games. I think in the end it was about, 120 games or something like that?
It was 102.
Yeah, oh, that's right. There were, the stage one, there was like 127, right? Something like that, yeah.
126 stage one.
Yeah, okay. But yeah, so a lot of people were writing reviews. Rob wrote a tremendous number of them and very like detailed and good reviews. I found that part of it really interesting because I had a real problem with it initially because I didn't feel like some people were being as thoughtful as they should be in these things, and they were contributing like a voice to a game, but like maybe weren't. I felt like some people weren't saying like everything that should be said, or they weren't being as considerate in what they were saying, and therefore, this game that might not get a fair shake, because this one person kind of said something was a little thoughtless. And so I had kind of an issue with it, but ultimately I kind of came around on it. I mean, I think the quality of the reviews got better and better as the contest went on, as people kind of like settled into it and realized that, I don't have to get this all done right away. I've got a couple weeks to kind of like, go through it and be more deliberative.
The quantity makes that less of an issue as well. I mean, there were 813 reviews in Alan's spreadsheet. Most of the games got 4, 5, 6 reviews. So.
Right. Yeah. My habit was mostly that somebody would like say something dismissive about one of the games that Dan or another Gauntlet community member had something to do with, and I got pissed. But that was tended to be the my personal trauma that was going on with it.
It's hard when you feel like a high status person is controlling the dialogue about something, and you don't have a way to get an entry into that conversation and change what people are thinking.
Yeah. Well, so, but like, I came around to it and I began to really value what people were doing. Rob, you wrote so many of these reviews. I wanted to find out, when you were reading these games and when you were like deciding what you were going to write down, like what were your big ticket items? Like what were you looking for?
So yeah, in terms of like what I wanted to review, I decided that, with a few exceptions near the end, that it would be best to stick to only write about games that I enjoyed. So if I got to a point in a game where I was just pushing myself and forcing myself to read it, I would just stop myself and allow myself to give up because I didn't want to wind up feeling hostile toward the games in any way. And then at the end of it all, like I was like bored, and I was like, all right, people, tell me some games to review that I didn't want to review the first time, and it was a bad idea. Not that I think I did anything wrong, but like I just felt bad. But in terms of like what I looked for and what I decided I needed to talk about in the reviews, is I really two things. I wanted to talk about everything that made me happy and excited, because these were reviews that I liked. And, in some cases I had a lot of critiques, so I wanted to make sure, for the sake of the person reading it, to put the nice things in there. And the other thing was, at a certain point, I was calling them reviews, and then I just decided, partly because of your point that if a game isn't played, it can't really be reviewed, I decided to start calling them critiques, and then calling them that helped me think of how to write them. And then I just sort of wrote them, in some cases almost literally, as like dialogues with the designer, where I would be just, in some cases, asking questions, saying, why did you do this? What is this? What's the reason for this? And like, if you're going to expand, maybe this is where you want to expand. This is an area that needs it. And I also always try to keep in mind, the word limit, the time limit, the difficulty that people are operating under, and never try to avoid saying anything too nasty or couch all of the most negative stuff in terms of my preferences, because you can't really, like, people have preferences and that's fine. But yeah, I guess that's what I would say.
Yeah, so actually, one of the games that you did in the last segment when you were requesting games, one of those was one of mine, and it was obviously something that wasn't like up your alley. Honestly, it was my phase 3. It wasn't something that was up my alley either when I wrote it, but I was really happy to read your crit of it because everything that you criticized were things that were like, from the perspective of just pure game design, like these are bad things that are in the document. Like these are things that are unclear, this part is weak. And I thought that it came off as a very like instructive thing for me, even if it wasn't something that you really were into.
That's really great. What game was that?
That was actually High Velocity Times at Space High.
Yeah, and I was grateful for some of the times that I was forced to like games that I wasn't that into, because I wound up finding things that I really did enjoy and that I would have missed. So, and there was stuff in there that I enjoyed. But also, one of the things I tried to do is like, I couldn't find this, or I didn't understand this, or
Right.
and try to, as much as possible, put it on me, because I know from reading and writing games that sometimes the rule is there and it just doesn't see it.
Yeah, and I think that came across. At least on the one that was relevant to me, it did. So
Good.
I personally enjoyed your review of my Stage 3 game, Ad Libitum Absurdity, because you liked it so much. But
It was my number one.
yeah, I know. I actually, the funny thing is I'll admit it right now, I have almost no emotional connection to the game at all. Like none. I worked hard on it, and I tried to make it as good as I could, and I really, really tried to focus on like layout and organization, and I'm happy you said that you liked that, because I worked really hard on it. But I didn't feel much from it. Like I was handed a game that I just didn't feel much for, and so that was really one of the challenging things about the whole contest to me was I've got this game that I don't feel anything for, and so I'm just going to do my best to make it, like have my
job
voice
is
a little bit. Yeah.
to figure out how to feel something and make that a part of the game.
Yeah, for sure. Well, okay, so Rob, your things were awesome. Is there anything else you guys want to say about the sort of the social media aspect of the contest, or the chatter, or the reviews, anything like that?
I had a question for Paul, actually. You said that, a lot of people seem to come at it from places that weren't G+. Do you have a sense of like how many people were from like the G+ communities and how many came from outside sources?
I really don't. I mean, I didn't recognize a lot of the names. I did see some threads on Twitter, and there were at least 2 or 3 people. I'm sorry, on Reddit, and there were at least two or three people who came from Reddit. I did see some reshares on Twitter, and I imagine a few folks came that way. I think it's a minority. I think it's 10, 12 people. There were some people
Gotcha.
that there was at one point someone could not complete their Stage 3 game, and he felt really bad about it. I think he was having a family thing, but he handed it over to a friend of his who completed the Stage 3 game. So that brought in somebody who otherwise wouldn't have participated. So
Okay, I was just wondering if there was some like vast bizarro version of G+ where there's a whole untapped realm of role players who I just didn't know about, living their parallel lives on Twitter or something.
there are other communities that I've heard of at various times. I know that there's an active RPG design community on the Something Awful forums, but I've never actually looked for it. And I know Metafilter as well has like these sideboards that are topic specific, and there's game design stuff that happens there as well. But I don't know if folks from any of those places found out about Threeforged or not. But there are
Gotcha.
other places that do have active game design conversations.
Cool, awesome.
So-
Well, why don't we just go ahead and just do some closing thoughts on Threeforged then? I mean, this is probably the last time, we're going to talk about the contest before it happens again, Paul. Is it going to happen again, Paul?
Yeah, that's a super good question. If I can back up just a minute and talk about community effects a little bit more.
Oh, yeah, sure. Please do.
The things that because all I said was, you're looking at it and you're not seeing the community effects. And I want to tell you what I think the community effects are of Threeforged and what I'm happy about. The challenge is set up, anonymous all the way through. And I think this is obvious that, and the reviewing activity and the judging activity to give people status for their real talents and for the work that they actually do. Not because they're a white male game designer with status from prior games, that they've published, or because they have a successful blog or whatever. It's an opportunity for a community to recognize, and identify people who have talents that they haven't seen before, and people who do good work that they haven't seen before. So that's a community effect that I think is a big deal. It makes the community stronger. I think the fact that you as a designer participating in the challenge, you worked on 3 games with 2 other designers at each stage, and you've had subsequent conversations with some of those. Those are network effects. People are building relationships with people that they otherwise maybe never would have talked to, and you have a shared creative investment with them. You were involved in a project with somebody, you thought deeply about the same things, and you can have real design conversations and a real relationship going forward as a result of that. And those relationships, in a lot of cases, are across boundaries. They're across gender boundaries. They're across genre boundaries. I think one of the things we've seen in the indie RPG scene more recently, it's been 15 years since the Forge, or a little bit less since the Forge started. And what happens within any creative scene is that genres become more hardcore, and you get games that follow, the prior development a lot. And so you've got an OSR scene, and you've got people who only play story game type games, and you've got people who only play GM-less games. And so now we've had people working together on projects that cross genres and cross boundaries within the hobby, which breaks those boundaries down and which gets people to appreciate aspects of other parts of gaming that they otherwise might not have had exposure to. And then finally, you'll note, and there was conversation about this, I didn't put a Creative Commons license up front on the challenge. So now, if you're invested in your game, you've got to do this messy human interaction thing. You actually have to reach out to somebody and have a conversation and like I did with the designer and said, can I make a fan version of your game? Your people are having conversations about things they care about. And if you put a Creative Commons license up front, you absolve people of the responsibility of having real human interactions, and you prevent them from being surprised by the generosity of other people, surprised by what human beings are like. You just give them permission to take an idea and do what they want with it. And I'm a big fan of actual human interaction. I think it makes community stronger. And I think all of these community effects, they're out there in the online scene, changing it, making it stronger, and they don't look like a publisher forum, and they don't look like a discussion group. They're just strengthening effects within the hobby. So anyway, that's what I think. And you can react to that if you want, or we can talk about the...
I love it. I mean, look, the Gauntlet has been happily destroying this notion that we should all just be playing story games and not OSR games, right? Like, I still have people who give me grief because I like OSR stuff, right? And, it's like, well, you play all these other, like, really cool, like, story games. Like, how don't you see how these games are not worth your I get that. So I don't know. I'm with you on that. I don't like the idea of the hobby being, like, partitioned off, except for Pathfinder players. Those people can go fuck themselves. So
I'll say that Paul had done a Creative Commons requirement. I don't know if I would have done the contest, because to me, there's no point in doing a contest unless I might produce something that I can publish, and I don't think I want to publish Creative Commons, and I don't want to make that decision before I even know what I've designed, And I liked the way that Paul put it. He wants to force people to be humans about it. And I had to have a messy, uncomfortable human conversation with Nick. And I was really sort of anxious, and it was really long. This, like, I'm sorry, like, half of it was I'm sorry in different ways. But I didn't want to co-publish it with him. I wanted to do it on my own. And I didn't know what to do if he wanted to keep it, because there's no way that our two games could coexist in a marketplace because they're the same game. But thankfully, he's not like me, and he was fine with letting me, take it over, and that's great. And frankly, even if the end result had been like, oh, I can't publish the game because we both can't flex on it, I'd rather have had that happen and have the chance at doing this the way I want to, than, the sure thing that's not going to be pleasing.
Yeah, that's great. Well, I think the contest was tremendous. It was an emotional experience a lot of the times. Like, if we can just kind of function on an emotional level here for a minute, I found there were times where I was just so infuriated with the process. Like, for example, when I got my stage 2, I was just, I was like gobsmacked with, like, I don't know what to do. And I feel like I'm going to bail out on this. Like, I don't know if I can do anything with this. And that's why, as we've mentioned already, Paul's pep talk video came at, like once I went and watched that, I was like, okay, all right, now I kind of feel a bit better about this, There was that aspect of it. It was reading the reviews, reading people say critical things about my games that I felt were unfair was difficult to go through. I suspect that the people who wrote the games that we play tested probably didn't enjoy hearing some of what we had to say about some of them,
If I could say real quick, listening to how you wanted to love the Linux so much and it just didn't work for you, and my version So you were like, well, if only it was a little bit simpler. I was like, my version's simpler. It's very tough, even as someone who has some degree of experience with it.
Yeah. I mean, I'm not a game designer. I've only got a few games under my belt that I consider to be like, even remotely playable. And they're just little things that I've done just for my personal pleasure, really. And so I've never had my work exposed to people like that. And so I have to imagine it must be really difficult, like, I don't know, maybe it's not Paul. I don't know. Like, every time someone like, criticizes the token draw thing and Clay That Woke or whatever, right? Like, I got just a little taste of that, I think, of like what it's like to have people like laying their thoughts bare, like we do every week on podcast about games. So, but I try to think that we are offering something constructive, not just like, negative. But anyway, Dan, what were your thoughts on Threeforged?
I feel like I had an easier time than most of the people that I've talked to since, because every game I got, I felt like I was kind of getting back what I was putting into it in a lot of ways. I don't know. My karma was balanced on these because I put a half-formed idea in as phase 1, and I got one back at phase 2, but it was a half-formed idea that I liked, so I was okay with it. And I was like, all right, well, I have to make all the mechanics for this, but I guess that's fair because I didn't make any mechanics in stage 1. So, and then like stage 3, I don't know. It was something that even though I wasn't super into the game I got, it was interesting enough from like a design standpoint of like, how do I change this into something interesting, and like, how do I find the fun in actually writing it? And I actually had more fun writing the stage 3 because it was just a different tone than anything else I had done. And so it was very lighthearted, and I was just able to make stupid examples and have fun with that. So I don't know. I loved it. Like, I didn't seem to have nearly as many issues as a lot of people did with it.
Your stage 3 was lighthearted as compared to your stage 1, which was about a college party where someone dies.
Right. Yes.
So, yeah. Well, so Paul, I'm curious to get your thoughts, like just kind of logistically, like where does Threeforged go from here? Like, what are you? Is there anything you're going to change about the contest, or are you definitely doing it again? Like, kind of what's your thinking on that?
So I have a lot of thoughts about that. In one way, it's kind of hard because I don't think it's totally played out just yet. It's sort of underground right now. People are having their conversations and figuring out what's going to happen with these games that they've worked on together. Are they going to do what Rob is doing and one designer's going to move forward with it, or are they going to collaborate, or are they going to, like Sage Latora did with Adam Coble on Dungeon World, what's going to happen? There's so many, they could each do different versions, or they could, there's so much that could happen as a result of that. And I don't think it's totally played out. Also, the things that I did, with the hashtag and with the anonymity and the, those things could play out in other game design challenges going forward. I'd be surprised if Game Chef doesn't use a hashtag next year, because the energy around the reviewing activity was so palpable, and the energy around the challenge was so palpable.
It was super successful in that regard. I mean, it really was. Like, and I'll tell you what, like, my favorite thing to do every day that the review period was going on was to go up to my Google search bar and type in Threeforged and see just like all the stuff that came up,
Yeah, so I think those things haven't played out. I think, I compare it, in my head to Game Chef and to other game design challenges, and, is there a future for it? My sense, with Game Chef is it's generally the same number of English language participants every year. 100 and some, and people do it and then they don't do it again, kind of a thing. So it stays at sort of the same size. With Threeforged, with the way the energy level was on it, my sense is that it will be twice as big next year, and that's a bigger ball of wax. I was lucky in that, I didn't have a job while I was running it. Next year, I would absolutely have to delegate it and project manage it a little bit, because I really think that it would be a bigger thing. So that would be one, if I do it as an annual thing, definitely there'd be some delegation. I can tell you absolutely if I do it if I do it again, one thing I would change is there were only 13 women who participated in the challenge. Roughly, anyway. I mean, just judging by the names of the participants, and I was wrong about some. I thought there were 11, but I didn't recognize that Ashton might be a woman's name, and there were and there were others. So I think there were about 13. Super low. I'm not satisfied with that. I thought going into it that the anonymity aspect of it, the ability, the fact that you were going to be judged on your real talents and your work and not based on, any prior status or gender or anything would make it obviously compelling to women, and that I would get, at least 40% participation, or
Right,
something,
yeah,
maybe that was unrealistic. And I didn't. So I think it wasn't obvious that, that those effects, and plus also the relationships that you'd be forming within the community, as a result of working on games with people. I thought that would be compelling. So I wasn't happy with, just 13. If I did it again, I would, when I announced it, I would have, a couple of testimonials from from women who participated who had good experiences. And I would say, if you're a designer and you know a woman who is brilliant and deserves recognition within our community, ask her to participate. And, let her know about the challenge and tell her that it would be awesome and look at these testimonials. And I think that would bend the curve anyway. So that's absolutely something that I would do differently. What do you think that I should do differently? I mean, the rest of the internet has already sounded off on
I don't know if I had some thoughts, but my thoughts, like, they're very fluid and I change them all the time. And so, I at one point I thought, oh, maybe like it should only be partially anonymous, but then I don't know. I've kind of come around to just the way you did it, honestly, like, because having had the benefit of time to see how it all played out, I think it played out. It seems like you hit most of your goals except for the ones that you just outlined. And, I don't think I really have any thoughts on that. Dan, Rob, do you guys have anything with it?
What about if you could publicly shame the people who didn't finish your game?
Oh, that's a good one. Yeah, can we do that in the future?
Yeah, see that I intentionally did not do that. You can look at the list of completed games and you can see who didn't complete beyond stage 1 or beyond stage 2. I mean, you know who didn't pull through, but you don't know who didn't pull through for you.
I was.
You don't know who personally wronged you.
Yeah, I was planning to dedicate an entire episode to shaming the asshole who didn't finish my stage 1 game. So I'm a little disappointed about that part of the contest, but never mind. We'll let that go.
I don't think the community gains anything by. What was that, Rob?
I said I think that's a good choice. That it's not easy to find out who failed you. Even though for me that would be motivating to make me finish. I don't think it would be good.
No, I'm only kidding.
It would be temporarily cathartic, but not good for the long term.
Yeah, I wasn't going to do a whole episode of shaming, just a segment. All right, so, okay.
If I could say one thing about an improvement is that, and I'm sure that Paul's going to do this, but there were rules that developed along the way. Like, the fact that you could use art and do layout in Down 3, and other small issues like that would be nice to have a central repository for all the rules, and you wouldn't have to say, oh, well, Paul said it in a thread somewhere, which I get why it didn't happen this time, but those seem like obvious opportunities for next time.
You're right. It needs a frequently asked questions that covers some of that stuff. The PDF thing was sort of in the back of my mind. I figured, oh yeah, but I didn't really think it out. So yeah. And people would have done things like they would have put art in an RTF file early on, and it would have gone, through the various stages to the end. So it'll be a little different.
Well, the only way to know what to do is to do this and find out what didn't work. The other thing I would want to say is I'd really love to see someone pick up anonymity as a one-round thing. I don't think obviously with the Threeforged that can happen, but I really hope someone does a one-round anonymity game a design contest, because I'd really like to see really one person's vision, but really also relieved of any kind of status,
Yeah.
Yeah, actually, as a person who isn't really involved in game design contests, I was not aware that anonymity wasn't a part of them. I kind of assumed that you would be anonymous in most of these, but I suppose that's not the case.
I distinctly remember anonymity. Anonymity is a part of Game Chef up until the reviews are all written, right? Or it's been a while since I've done it.
Yeah, I don't know.
Because I know that I definitely remember. I think it was Jason Morningstar chastising Steve Hickey about a Game Chef submission at one point where Steve had put his name, all over the thing, and so I know that anonymity's been used in the past.
Yeah, but it seems like such a such a easy fix to what would be some issues of like, well, I'm just going to check out what these designers I like made, and then I'm done with this, right? So it seems like a really good addition to it.
It felt to me like it was really important to this because, geez, I mean, if you get a high status game, a game from a high status designer, you get Vincent Baker's game. Are you going to heed my second, my pep talk and just change whatever the heck you want?
Right. Yeah.
Right, and I would, and but yeah, it felt to me like in order for it to work the way I wanted it to, it had to have anonymity.
Absolutely, especially with that aspect of the game's changing hands. Definitely needed that.
All right, cool. Well, we've gone a little long, so let's just kind of wrap it up real fast. Does anybody have any last things they want to say about Threeforged?
I have a question for Paul. Was this contest in any way inspired by that Game Chef conversation? I mean, that Gen Con conversation a few years ago where he talked about picking up people's dead projects in the game design tea party and stuff. Do you remember what I'm talking about?
I remember that. It wasn't actually. It was Dan Maruschak has I think it's called Reforged community on Google+, and he hasn't been happy with the activity of people. And I talked about this on the Gauntlet last time, but he hasn't been happy with the activity of people sort of doing play testing for each other, and the community hasn't played out the way he wanted it to. And this was me thinking about if I wanted to do community building, how would I do it? And I pitched it to Dan, but it wasn't his thing, so I ran it myself.
Awesome.
Cool. Dan, do you have anything else?
Nope.
Paul?
No.
All right, cool. Well, that was our podcast. We don't have time for community feedback. Actually, I didn't even prepare anything for community feedback anyway. So even if we had time, we wouldn't have anything to do. So instead, I want to give a shout out to Gauntlet Hangouts. Folks, we have an online play community called Gauntlet Hangouts. It's very active. There are lots and lots of games being run on it. I was going to go through the list, but I've decided against that. But what I do want to talk about is we are starting a new thing. Sort of a new, it's very me, kind of a new initiative that I'm calling Dungeon World Adventuring Company. And the idea is that all of the Dungeon World games that we run in various Gauntlet spaces are going to essentially be, all the characters will be part of an adventuring company. There will be a shared document that talks about all the common things that all the players need to know about the adventuring company. There'll be custom moves and gear that you can use between characters and things like that. And I'm even thinking about commissioning some art for it. But anyway, if you're into Dungeon World like I am, I think 2016 is going to be an amazing Dungeon World year for the Gauntlet, with this new adventuring company idea as a way of kind of bringing these disparate Dungeon World games kind of together and creating some cohesion between them. I'll link to my original thoughts on that in the show notes. But that's all I've got. Rob, thank you so much for being on the podcast.
Thank you so much. I'm so happy to finally.
Yeah, absolutely. Paul, thanks for being on the show again.
Thanks for having me. It's great.
Dan, thank you for being an able co-host.
No problem.
And listeners, thanks for listening.